Richard de Crespigny,
Yeah,
welcome to the show.
great to be here, Brad.
Mate, I'm really excited to talk to you because I think from an outsider's perspective, a lot of people know you, Rich, as the guy who saved QF32, a flight that not long out of Singapore was destined to go down. But your skill set, your knowledge, what makes you the specialist that you are in the aviation world, and those expertise safely landed a flight and saved a lot of lives. But even just in the 10 minutes that we've been sitting here chatting, I'm realizing that there's a whole other side to you that I think is very interesting. And so I'm looking forward to getting into this today.
Well, see, Brad, I'm going to correct you immediately because QF32 was a story of team resilience.
Mm,
And to be resilient, teamwork is necessity.
mm,
Polo, all these amazing stories of recovery and success, SpaceX. It's all teamwork. And so QF32 was a team success. It's not my success, it's a team success. And teamwork is one of the elements of resilience that everyone must
mm,
understand, because if you don't form a team in your home or in your company, in your
mm.
the organization and society, you will not be resilient.
Well, before we get there, I'll say that I believe you, but I also think you're very humble. So I want to start though by asking you about the origins of your interests. I know you were born in Melbourne, educated in Melbourne. Talk to me about early life because I sit in front of a character today that, I can see that your mind ticks. There's a lot of things that interest you. You have a wealth of knowledge. And I'm curious to know whether that was present throughout childhood.
I was certainly interested in engineering as a young boy, up to about 10, 12, and I bought engineering kits and built electric things. I played around with 240 volts, and I discovered that when you're experimenting with 240 volts, you need a big long broomstick, because every time you turn the big power switch on, you hear this explosion because you've made a mistake. So yes, I became a little bit weary of turning on 240 volts. I learned how to use it by I guess electrocuting many things along the
Mm,
way. But so I had that interest in electrics. Then I joined the Air Force, and that brought me into fast, high tech, leading edge, extraordinary technology. And I wanted to fly the biggest, the fastest, the best aircraft, which in the Air Force was the F-111, and it has all these amazing computer
mm,
systems. And so I was launched in the Air Force. I had a Bachelor of Science degree, which I actually thought was a useless degree, because we did things from marine and atmospheric interactions to atomic physics to infrared physics. And I thought, I'll never get a job with this. I thought it was a total waste of space. But now I realize that I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. And that science degree gave me the ability to think about technology, to rationalize it, have a sense of reasonableness. So my passion for science and technology and engineering, that degree really helped. And I've kept that interest up. And really, there are so many things that are happening that are complicated. You can't just say, well, I think or I have a feeling about something.
mm,
Engineers are driven by facts to 10 decimal places. And if you can't measure it, it's really not worth talking about. So from my earliest days, I had an interest in not just tracking science, but documenting it, going to the source of the information. If we have leaves of knowledge on a tree, they're supported by branches, trunks, and even the roots under the ground. So if you've got to understand technology, you've got to understand the foundations, the root structure,
mm.
and then the scaffolding of all the different ways to get to those leaves with the branches. So I've always had an interest in technology from the ground up.
Yeah.
I don't learn how to drive a car by just saying, well, here's the key, turn it on. I have to understand how the car works inside. And when I was young, I rode motorbikes. I bought my first motorbike, which was a Lambretta, which they still sell in Italy. It was $15 and it didn't work. And I was about 10 years of age, so I took it home, changed the petrol in the float chamber for the
Mm,
carburetor, kicked it, and it came to life. So that early experience with mechanics and then the Air Force, with data, science, it really laid the foundations for me to tackle any science and technology. And I also built up a knowledge system to track it, so I wouldn't lose the
mm.
data. And that knowledge system mimics the way my brain works. So really, that's the foundation for how my life progressed, all driven by facts and reason and logic. Um, And I guess the hero in my life for someone to aspire to who's really excelled the most would have to be probably Elon Musk,
Mm.
who is absolutely driven by facts and inverts the logic many times. Instead of starting from perfection coming down, he starts with nothing, failing, working up. So, and society is so exciting at the moment with all the different technologies.
Yeah.
It's the best time to be alive. And if I could choose to be born anytime, I'd be born now. And the opportunities are just fantastic. It's a great time to be alive.
So let me ask you this. It sounds like that need to understand the facts, the foundational level of what makes something work, satiates your mind in one sense. Does it complicate your mind? Does it make sometimes life frustrating where you can't figure out how something works or the reason behind it?
Oh, yes. If I can't find the source of something, I'll get very frustrated. I have to know the source, and
Mm.
I can build up the end result from any amount of facts. If I understand how the system is built, I can predict how it's going to work. Or if it doesn't work, I can work out how to turn it off and isolate it. And that's a skill that many have lost. I mean, in an aircraft, in the 380, we had a thousand
Mm.
computers and they're black boxes. We don't know what happens inside. We don't know who's written them. And we are using those boxes. But if those boxes fail, and they will fail, it's not like a car. When your electric car breaks down, you pull over and call for help or the NRMA for a tow. We can't do that in the air. We have to, whatever we're given in an aircraft, if the computers don't work, we've got to understand how to turn them off, shut them down, and then we've got to have the resilience to fly the aircraft manually with no automation. And that's something which, by the approach that I have a great deal of confidence to do that. But if you were starting from the top down, key turners, you're saying, well, if I turn the key, the engine starts, I'm happy.
Mm.
But if that engine doesn't start, you're lost, and you won't be a resilient pilot. So, and this is what we're seeing in some of the things that are going on around the world. So it's a very deep topic, but and it's very onerous obligation to try and keep up with the knowledge and document your knowledge systems. Some people don't like it because I can find information so fast, and this is for the last 30
Mm.
years, that it can actually intimidate people. So, however, for my career, being feverishly busy trying to understand the base foundations of everything has helped me.
Let me ask you about your parents. What did your parents do for work and what was their influence on, all of what you're describing here as a childlike curiosity that was taken to the next level?
Good question. My father in fact, he wanted to join the Air Force. He was at Geelong Grammar in Melbourne. He had the record for having the most canings at school. I think he almost averaged a caning a day. And at night, he used to jump out of the dormitory and ride on a push bike to Lara, the airport near Geelong Grammar. And the military aircraft during the Second World War, they would do run-ups, doing their
Mm.
checks before they took off. When they're waiting there to take off, he would knock on the back of the aircraft and say, "Can I go flying?" Which was a mighty surprise to those pilots. And this is, 10 o'clock at night. But they would take him flying. And Dad thought actually he got away with all that flying for all his school career. He never
Mm.
got caught. He would get back at 3 or 4 in the morning after flying around the whole areas of Victoria. But he discovered the headmaster had written a letter to my grandfather saying, "Your son is going truant at night. He's flying with the Air Force. And he has such a passion, I don't think we should really try and temper it. And if you agree,
Mm.
we'll say nothing."
That's interesting.
And so
That
they let him
fascinates
go
me.
truant, and he then joined the Air Force, and then the war stopped. He joined ANA, which is a
Mm.
precursor of ANSET, and he was working his way up through ANA. And so he was, again, very methodical. At the age of 23, Sir Ivan Hollyman, the head of ANA, Australian National Airways, said, "Peter, you have an unlimited budget, go around the world, you pick where you want to go away for 2 years and come back with the best practices of aviation in the world." At the age of 23. Can you imagine that?
So where did he go?
Oh, England, Europe,
Mm.
Austria. He went to America, went all through America. He brought back the ticketing system from United
Mm.
that became the ticketing system used all throughout Australia. He brought that back. He was 24. I just cannot imagine the world where someone is a 24-year-old is told, you have a blank check, but this is your job. And when you have gathered all this information, come back. So Dad was very honourable. He was reliable, trustworthy, and he started a furniture company because A&A went broke, and that was a success. And he said to all his 4 boys, you're welcome to come into the home business, but you first must go away and do something else and be successful. So I went to the Air Force, was successful, never went back. All the other boys went off, did something else. They never went back. And that was probably a really good first lesson, I think, in how to bring up kids. You need to build up a sense of necessity and make them work hard, have a bit of pain and suffering to build grit.
Let me ask you how, I think an interesting conversation around pursuing dreams and really grabbing life by the balls, for lack of a better expression, is that there shouldn't be any plan B. But it sounds like in your case, having the opportunity to always return back to the family, to know that the business was there and there was a place for you, I think it allows you to go out into the world and be bold, right? To be willing to really try, to be willing to potentially fail or learn or make mistakes along the way. Did that encourage you to go out and absolutely embrace every possibility?
Well, I think you're viewing this from your perspective, but let's view it from a different perspective. My father, when we had the motorbikes, we lived near a state forest, and my father, we'd say, Dad, we're going away riding the motorbikes into a 200 square mile state forest. And he said, well, dinner's at 8 o'clock. And so we'd go off. He didn't know where we went. On motorbikes, we'd break down. We'd sometimes break legs. We looked after ourselves. We got back. We kept the motorbikes going. My father enabled us to take risks that, yes, we would fail, we would learn. And so this is, why do the adults today not let kids, their children, take the risks that those parents took when they were young that made them great? So really the perspective is the parents today must let the kids ride to school. They must let them climb trees. I mean, it's never been safer. The amount of children being abducted or deaths, murders are the lowest ever. This is the safest time. This is not a time for the parents to be swayed by the media that has a view of if it bleeds, it leads, to scare people. The parents have to release their kids to take risks. The kids they'll fail, they'll learn, they'll adjust, and they'll be good. If you look back through all the people that have been successful, they've all suffered some sort of hardship in their life. 18 out of 31 Australian Prime Ministers either were orphaned or lost a parent at an early age. I lost my mother at 17 years of age. And when you suffer these traumas, you either succumb to it and be crushed by it, or you use it as a stepping stone to recovering and being better, which is really that's resilience, isn't it? So as a parent, the parents out there must let their kids take risks, learn from making mistakes, and then the children will be better set to lead their own lives and take their own risks.
There's 2 things I want to ask you that I picked up there, and that's an amazing story, beautiful story. At risk of jumping a little bit ahead of your story from where we are now, as a parent yourself to 2 kids that I know you love and adore, Alex and Sophia.
That's
Am I
right.
right? How hard is it as a parent to recognize, okay, I know that there was a very valuable lesson in going out and taking risks as a young man that my father and mother afforded me. How challenging is it, though, to do that with your own kids?
Oh, it can be really challenging to, that, for instance, we have enough money that we could help our kids. Maybe we could help them buy a house. But no, they have to, everyone at some stage in their life must live with necessity. You have to do it. There is no choice. If you are always told there's a safety net, you can never hurt yourself, then you really don't take any risks. Sometimes you just need to go out there and give it a go. All our children know that we are there if they really need us. But the best thing you can both do is to leave the state, get away from your parents, form your own groups. When you have children, you need your own peer group of friends and that you can share the children's duties around. Get out on your own and be successful. And if you have troubles, we're there. We will always help you.
Mm.
But you must go out on your own. You must face risks. You building, failing or succeeding builds confidence, it builds courage, builds intrepidness. And so they need to understand that they are in control of themselves. They don't have this safety net. They need to get out and do things. This is a pretty philosophical thing about how to bring up kids. But if you overprotect your kids, you are not doing them a favor.
Let me ask you, you said to act with necessity. Tell me if I'm taking this incorrectly, but to me, I interpret that as to have a deep-seated desire, to have a dream, to have something to go after in life. Is that what you mean by that?
Well, it could be. I'm thinking necessity in what is the necessity of life? Oxygen and food, maybe a roof over your head. And sometimes money gets short and you realize, I don't think I can pay the rent. I have to do something. Well, a lot of children might think, well, I'm not going to go and clean a toilet. There are plenty of jobs where you could go and clean toilets or being waitresses. Some people think, no, I'm not going to do that. No, they have to actually realize that if that gets down to the worst, society in Australia has many safety nets. We will always feed people in Australia. The government spends a lot of money to protect people. St Vincent's Hospital feeds people at 6:30 every morning in the city. So yes, you can have food, but the necessity means that if you don't act to change your situation, you may not have a roof over your head, or you may go hungry during the day. And that necessity to survive, that will make you do things. It'll make you appreciate the structures that exist around you in society. But it will also give you the courage to take risks. Looking at failure, you fail fast, you fail well, you regard failure as stepping stones to success. Elon Musk does not build rockets expecting them to work straight away. In fact, if all his rockets work straight away, he would not be happy, because maybe the rockets are too strong, they're too heavy. He wants to see the rockets fail, so he knows he's using the least amount of material so he can get more cargo. So your way that you view failure will determine your path in life. If you're not tolerant to failure, you won't take risks. And if you don't take risks, you'll never succeed. You actually have to welcome risk, take risks, accept failure, welcome failure, and see it as the way to go forward. I fail frequently. I've got a podcast, which at the moment is not going to be renewed after the first 20. Is that a failure? Maybe. I don't mind that. That's okay. I'm going to continue with the podcast in my own way, using my own resources. So it doesn't fuss me. Yes, it's a failure that the podcast isn't being renewed because there's not enough advertising revenue from it. But that's okay. I don't mind. I'm going to continue with it. So you just have to try and ideally fail in the little things so you get the big things right. You try and fail in training or fail in practice. But when it comes to the major decisions in life, those failures will help. Those failures along the way will ensure you probably get the big decisions right.
I wonder what your view is on why we have the narrative we do around failure. I can't speak to what it was like during your childhood. I'll be 30 next year, and my sense is that I feel even the world has changed from the world I grew up in. And then around 18, when social media came into existence, I think that we started to brand failure by a comparison metric, by comparing where I'm at this age to where someone else is, because we have exposure to so much more now. I wonder whether you think along those similar lines or whether you see it differently with your experience.
There's a lot in that. And when you say I look at failure as to how I am with other people, that is one of the curses in society, because many people, and in a socialist society, and Australia's become, particularly Victoria's, getting more socialist every day. People don't actually care about what they're getting paid. They're actually just more interested in, am I getting more than the next person? They need to not look at a comparison. They need to say, have I got enough to do what I want to do? Am I happy? Have I got a fulfilling or a worthwhile life? I mean, ultimately, we're not motivated in life by being happy. In fact, we make many decisions in life that make us unhappy, but they're all targeting having a fulfilling or worthwhile life. And that decision of whether you have a fulfilled or worthwhile life is not judged by comparing yourself to someone else. It comes from within, your own locus of control. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that the media, and I've used that expression, if it bleeds, it leads. It's negative, right? All the news in the morning just talks about murders the day before. There's plenty of good news out there, but they pass the bad news because this is Danny Kahneman. He said we rate or we value negative information twice as much as we would value positive information of the same degree. So yes, we're much more critical of the negative, so the media gives us a negative. And the people who focus on social media write negative things, always negative. So we need to get off that social media, and instead of sitting down reading the screen, everyone telling us how bad things are, we need to get outside, ride a bike, go surfing. All the positive people in life actually are not watching the computers getting pulled down. They're outside doing something and in control of their life. And I think the sooner we decide that this social media is a positive feedback of negativity, and we're sort of doing that because we're banning it for 16-year-olds and less, which is great. But even for adults, that negativity of social media and a lot of these websites where people just post in degree of terribleness, we need to get away from that. And so it's a philosophical change that we must understand. And let's face it, technology is changing. Social media didn't really exist 20 years ago. This is something we're going to have to learn about, and then we'll adapt. And I think we'll realize that we have to excise ourselves from social media.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. Even as a person who utilizes it and has certain successes in life because I have access to something like that, like this show exists because I can promote it and advertise it through those mediums. But I do really agree with you that the ratio is out of whack. The ratio is in being, I go online and the ratio of negative to positive is very high compared to when I step out the door in the morning and my wife and I take our dog Barney for a walk. I have positive after positive after positive interaction with real human beings who look me in the eyes, who give me a smile, who say g'day, who make me feel good about the world that I exist in when I look at the water, when I see the sun rise, all of these things that are inherently good for us as human beings that feed the soul are so positive that they far outweigh the negative that exists in the real world. But the problem is, if you spend 8 hours on your screen a day, social media becomes your real world. You are engulfed in it.
It's terrible, isn't it?
It's scary. It's scary, Rich. You
And
can
it's
understand.
unpredictable. Trump is unpredictable. The world becomes, when there is no predictability, people get nervous, anxious.
Yeah, we cling to certainty in an uncertain world.
Gen Z is probably, it's called the anxious generation.
Have you read Jonathan Haidt's work on this? He wrote a book called The Anxious Generation, and I know he's a big believer in this, proponent of under 16s being banned from social media. I'm yet to read his work. I've listened to him on a bunch of podcasts, and it's actually something I flagged yesterday that I think I want to pick that book up because I think about where Soph and I are on the journey of thinking about kids over the course of the next year. We're at least actively pursuing that, and I think about the world that my kids will grow up in. And it feels like a very different world to the world that I did, with plenty new positives, but also a whole heap of new challenges. And so learning to navigate that, firstly for myself, I'm still susceptible to these things.
There's not a whole lot more challenges. There's a whole lot more opportunities. There's so many opportunities, so many disruption. Your children can pick the area, whether it want to be energy or medicine or transport or materials or 3D printing, genomics. They can go, whatever their interests are, it's been disrupted so fast. This is a world of opportunity. I think anxiousness is at one end of the spectrum to resilience. It's a constant line. Anxious, underconfident, no courage, no decisions, no success, right? So we've got to build up that courage. You've got to start with confidence, because the Gen Z probably feel that don't have many options. Well, they need to get off social media and start to do things, and they might. But we have to target the confidence, and then we might solve the anxiousness, and then you move along that spectrum of courage, intrepidness, decision making, failing, success. I think that's where we can help our children, by building their confidence. And interestingly, I did a podcast where I was speaking to someone about the anxious generation, and I said to her, do you think, to a great degree, if you want to be a good pilot, you have to be scared. If you want to train someone to handle the terrifying things, you have to expose them to it. You have to train them in the things that scare them until they don't scare them. And grit comes from failure and determination and pain and suffering. So we need to understand, if that's the path to success, then that's what we need to cultivate in people. And so I asked this person who wrote a book about the anxious generation, should we have compulsory service? And that could be scouts, military, cadets, social service. And she refused to answer the question. She thought it was an intimidating question, or it might not be seen very well outside. And I thought that was a big cop-out, because I absolutely think that children today, and if it suits the country from a defence perspective, absolutely there should be compulsory service for a year where you go to the military or to the scouts. And Dick Smith would say that his success started with going to the scouts. It taught him how to take risks. Scouts, public service, do something where you are forced to give to the government or appreciate what happens in society. Just don't go from one silver spoon to another and be weak and anxious. So I think it's a discussion that should continue, and I think we should have compulsory service for a year after school to build up these kids' resilience.
It's interesting. I've never really thought about this deeply, but I don't know if I necessarily like the idea of compulsory service, but what I do like, which is a similar thread, is this idea of giving kids opportunities to step outside of themselves and into team environments. And I think what we're suffering at the hands of at the moment a little bit in society is a huge part of my childhood, and I know a huge part of my wife's childhood and all of my mates, was we all played team sport. We were all around other kids. We all had to learn to work in team environments, to respect the coach, to show up every week, to play our part in a system. And part of that system was one week your parents or you wash the jerseys of the team. One week you're, responsible for taking the oranges. There are these little responsibilities that come as part of looking after that team and being a part of that environment that I think, because of the fact that everyone is working more today and we live in a world where everyone is so busy and kids are getting to less sport as a product of their parents being busier, which I understand that there's a challenge there because financially, both parents need to work in most cases today, unless you move out of state or somewhere more rural where you can afford your lifestyle. I think that the challenges of kids having less access to that means that they're less involved in those kind of environments where responsibility is an integral part of their childhood.
I absolutely agree about the sport, with one exception, that you should be allowed to, you should have winners and losers.
I agree.
Right? Because that's what
I agree.
happens in life. You can go through school having never lost, and then you go into the workplace where your competitor company is trying to put you out of business. Now, is that bullying? Is that not fair? No, this is life. So you have to have children either passing or failing, and it's not failing that's critical, it's how you manage the failure. My son came back from university saying, for his mechatronic engineering degree, saying, I failed maths. I said, what are you going to do? He said, I'm thinking of giving up. I said, no, you're going back, you're going to do it again. But what if I fail it again? I said, then you're going to go back. There is no time limit for how many times you sit the maths exam. You resit it until you pass it. He did, he passed it. And that's exactly the advice he gives everyone else. It's not that you fail, it's how you handle it. And some of the most successful people in life have failed all along the way.
Yeah, I love it. We need to teach people that there is merit in showing up, improving, getting better.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because I think the common sense in this is lost, right? I think that absolutely we should praise kids for saying, "Hey, we're really proud of you for showing up and being involved and having a go." That's amazing. But hey, if you improve, if you learn to function better in a team environment, if you learn to develop skills, there are rewards out there for you in the world. And let's not confuse that. That
And
is real life.
and sports don't actually have to be so critical for succeeding or for, passing or not or winning. It can just be good fun. Tennis is good fun. It doesn't really matter who wins and loses if you say, well, I've learned something myself. So our perspective, and this is the parents' view, because sometimes parents are very aggressive on the side of the football oval. The parents have to say the kids are coming to run around, to have fun, to form teams. This is great. It doesn't matter what the score is. Just have fun. But this is where we've gone askew in our logic. And again, and maybe it's a push of society, but we need to, everything we do for our children should be there to help them grow, learn, fall out of trees to know that they should be careful, fall off the swing so they're careful. We have to accept that there'll be broken bones. We give them the confidence, and then they'll look after themselves. And ever since I left home when I was 17, I've never, ever asked my father for help. And he's gone now, but I guess my point is my independence was really part of my character. And the thought of asking for help was foreign to me. I would gladly go and clean toilets, do whatever I had to do before I would ever ask my father for help.
Let's go back to you. So your dad went to Geelong Grammar. So that's like a boarding
Very
school?
prestigious school.
Yeah, so it's a boarding school. You live on
Boarding
campus.
school in
yeah.
Victoria, in the country.
Were you educated the same way?
No, I was brought up in Melbourne, in Paran, and I still had a great education. But there were 4 boys, and we were so boisterous. We used to have fights with the fruit off neighbours' fruit trees, right, which they didn't appreciate. And I can't even start to tell you the things we did. My father was so concerned about the street and us not sort of destroying it. He bought 10 acres in the country, just to north of Melbourne, in a place called Flatout, and we got motorbikes. And so we burnt off all our steam, getting on motorbikes, doing crazy things, jumping, breaking our bones, riding into the forest, and he let us do that. And that was probably the thing, that was one of the 2 critical things he did. So he let us take risks. He didn't understand mechanics of bikes. We learnt that ourselves through them breaking down. But the second thing he did was he would enable a passion. So he thought, Richard has an interest in aircraft. I'll take him to the Air Force Academy at Point Cook in Melbourne and show him the academy with the science labs, the astronomy labs, computer labs. And I fell in love with it. He just had to let me go on a tour. And that then I became self-motivated, and I then fitted out the school with all the information systems on how to go to the Air Force, and I did all the research, and I chased that myself. So yes, I think parents, if you have someone who's interested in a technology, if it's aviation, take them to an air show, take them to the ADFA Academy in Canberra. Just trigger some of their passions, and they will motivate themselves.
So at 17, you joined the Royal Australian Air Force.
Yeah.
You mentioned your mum. So your dad, Peter, what was your mum's name?
Patricia.
Patricia. Did your mum pass before you joined the Air Force or
No,
after?
she died halfway through my last year of school.
Yeah.
And
was that a surprise?
It was. It was an error in medicine. Some people could say they killed her. The machine that was giving dialysis overheated. The oral alarm and the visual alarm, a light, both went off. The nurse that was meant to be in that ward to look after all the people decided to leave, so my mother died. And that was in the middle. So I came home and then she's dead and in the middle of school. So what do you do? And pretty devastating. And the only way for me to handle that, and this happens in traumatic stress, particularly in young children, if they're being faced with an aggressor, the fear response of fight, flight, freeze takes over. They can't fight the adult. They're small. They can't flight. They can't run away. They're locked. They're jammed down. What they can do is freeze. So they freeze, and then the only way through that is to disassociate. The out-of-body experience, right? So when you hear people saying they're disassociated in stress, this is the highest form of stress where the fear response doesn't help them. So I thought I could be detached, but instead I said, no, I'm going to use my mother as motivation. I had to really improve my marks to get into the Air Force. So I decided to work feverishly for the last 6 months. And I'd go to sleep at 2 a.m, then wake up at 8 o'clock and go to school. And I dedicated, I used that as a way to dissociate, push myself into the work, and I did really well at school. So that pain and suffering of losing my mother, I'd harnessed to throw myself in a work, and something positive came out of it. And I know lots of people in that same situation. One of the companies, in fact, that makes all the cameras that you are using today, he was kicked out of his home at 14 because his mother couldn't afford to feed him. He had to fend for himself. So through pain and suffering, and Jason Wan, the CEO of NVIDIA, gives a talk where he says, university graduates have high expectations, and they should because they come from great universities, but high expectation leads to poor resilience. And the way to resilience is through pain and suffering. And he said to these Stanford graduates, I wish you ample doses of pain and suffering, because that is the path to committing, necessity, grit, and focusing down. So I don't know if it's a depressing look at life, but it certainly says when you are faced with a crisis, and maybe there's a Chinese proverb that crisis and opportunity are interlinked. Crisis can be an opportunity, and if you look at it that way, harness that crisis, find the opportunity, and use that as a motivation to charge you ahead.
I'm interested, Rich. I know a lot of your generation in Australia are. Do you have any kind of religious belief?
Zero.
Zero.
I did at school. I went to a religious school, and I was, again, because I'm based on facts, the logic of religion doesn't make sense. I mean, there could be 1,000 examples I could give. Religion doesn't make sense from a logical perspective. Now, if there may be a God, I can't even say I'm an atheist. I don't know. There may be a God. And if there is, if he's happy to come and tell me, I guess what would it take for me to believe that he is a God? What would he have to do, or she? I don't know. But I guess my point is, I can't say there's no God, but I certainly don't think that there is. Because if there was a loving God, he wouldn't let this world persist in the way that it does. So, no, I'm not religious at all. I think that when we die, we go to dust. And so I've got 10, when you're born with 36,500 days of your life. Each one will come after the other, and it's how you live each day will determine what happens when you take your last breath. So think about what people want to say about you at your funeral, and just make sure that you achieve that before you die.
The reason I asked that question is not so much for religion's sake, but I wonder for you. You went to the RAAF. You, in a year, found yourself trained, prepared, and beginning to fly aircrafts at 18, which is young. You were flying a range of aircrafts, helicopters, transport aircraft, jets. I often think when I'm up in a plane as a passenger, I stare out at the world and you see how magnificent and miraculous everything is around you. I wonder for you, being up in the sky, I think whether religious or not, I'm not particularly religious. I did, similar to you, go to a religious school, but I have some belief or faith in something. that makes me feel a little bit more connected to the miracle that is the world around me. And thankfully, I'm very blessed that I haven't lost a parent, but I've lost grandparents and people that I was close to. And sometimes when I look out at the world, I think I wonder if someone can see and experience my life from the top down, someone who's passed, someone who's no longer here anymore. I wonder for you, whether being up there in the plane, having lost your mum not long before that, whether there was any kind of connection to something bigger where you feel like she's still with you.
Look, I can even rationalize by what I'm talking about, pain and suffering, that maybe my mother was taken from me to help me build up, right? But then I look at the 250,000 people that drowned at Aceh in that tsunami back in about 2000. And if there was a God, no loving God would allow that to happen. So that's point one. I think when you look at the logic of religion, the way it's portrayed, when you look at even the clothes that those people dress up in, it's antiquated. If they kept up with science and tried to adapt with science and technology, maybe they would have more success. I think the public relations of the church and religion is abysmal. And it's all based on fear of, they'll say, look, the next life, this life's bad, the next life's good. No, this is the only life you're actually going to have. So I think the whole merits, I think it's groupthink. And bearing in mind that there's hundreds of religions all saying there's only one God. So if there was a God, of that 100, 99 are wrong. So the whole thing is an exercise in illogic, futility, and not taking responsibility for your life. I'm driven by facts. And so I'm responsible for my safety. If I said to God, look, here I am in QF32, the engine's blown up, please land the aircraft, and I took my hands off the controls, I don't think we would have made it back to ground. But really, the first question I should have said was, God, why did you blow up that perfectly good engine? So, no, I think religion is actually a curse on logic, and that's why I don't have any part of it.
Well, I'm not the person to debate you on that, but I think you might resonate with this. This is something I wrote recently when thinking about what's been a bit of a change in belief for me. I just called it, does everything happen for a reason? I used to believe that everything in life happened for a reason, that heartbreak, loss, hardship, and cruelty have some kind of greater purpose or meaning. My view on that has changed a little, because as I've gotten older, I've come to realise that life isn't fair and that it can be quite cruel. I don't think it's fair that a mum and dad should ever have to attend one of their children's funerals. I don't think it's fair that where you were born should dictate the quality of your life. I don't think that it's fair that I was born with a chronic illness, but I was. The universe can't give me any rhyme or reason for that, but when I open my eyes in the morning, I can see plenty of reasons why it's my responsibility and my privilege to move forward with my life. So does everything happen for a reason? No, I don't think it does, but I do believe that me and this little life of mine is reason enough to keep going.
Yeah, I think life is unfair and bad things happen. That sums it up, really. And what you make of life is up to you. I think a lot of us go around thinking that everyone's watching us, everyone has an opinion, everyone's, thinking about us and when they're on the side of the room. No, everyone's actually just trying to survive themselves. They've all got their own struggles, and you have your struggle. Focus on yourself, and whatever your values are. And you said the word belief before, which you can say it. I will never use the word belief, or just say, because belief is taking a view without data. That's what religion is. It's having a view without facts to back it up. I have no beliefs. All I think is facts. Facts will control my life. So, and that satisfies my whole perspective on religion. So, yes, life is terrible. Bad things happen. No one's worrying about you. They don't care about you. What you do in life is up to you. Now, are you going to take responsibility for your life, or are you going to be a victim and try and call other people for help the whole time? These are attitudes. This is your values, and your values, how you think, act, and communicate, are critical. They come from inside. They're sort of more of like the amygdala, the emotional center of your brain. The emotions are driven by your values. And so whatever your values are, know them, own them, tell other people, and you'll be predictable. And the leaders that are successful, like Hawke and Howard, had strong values. You didn't even have to agree with them, but you understood what their values were. They were predictable, and you respected them, even if you didn't agree with what they did. But a person who doesn't have values, or they swap, unpredictable, you don't like them, you don't trust them. And the last Liberal Prime Minister was probably a person that I couldn't trust. I've only voted Labor once in my life, and that's because I could not vote Liberal with the last Prime Minister. I couldn't trust them. I didn't know what the values were. So the values are most important. And for someone growing up, or for someone in a difficult situation, maybe employment, just be true to your values. And then if you are, you will know, if you know who you're responsible to, who you're accountable to, then you'll know what authority you'll take, and then you'll know what to do. It's easy. Let me be more clear. In companies, most directors think they're responsible to the shareholders. No, they're not. They're responsible to the company. They're accountable to the shareholders. The shareholders can vote them out. But if you think you're responsible to the shareholders as a director in a company, it takes you down a path a bit like where Qantas was, and certainly GE and other companies where they've got financiers coming in, or even Boeing, where financiers coming in rather than kicking out the engineers or the people that actually knew the work. So it's knowing your responsibility is not just important as for a company board director. For a politician, it's critical. And I've talked about that. But even yourself at home, it's important that you know your values. They are yours. No one can change them. Own them, be proud of them, and be confident that if you keep to your values, you will generally make the right decisions, unless you're a mass murderer by design, I guess.
I really echo your sentiment there. The one question I have is that idea around predictability or change in values. Because I do agree, strong values are super important, but I wonder what your take is on when new information becomes available or changes in society or your life or your experience happen. We have to have some kind of bandwidth to expect maybe a change in what we once valued or seen as fact, right?
Well, I would see values as being philosophies, and facts are not philosophy. Facts come in to maybe support or break down the philosophies. A good example is energy, solar energy, the Australian energy market, which has got hydro, gas, coal, solar, battery. And you're looking at a government that's being intransigent with their views on this. They're saying no nuclear, we're going to use gas and all these other things. And they're giving no path. Net zero is not going to work. It's impossible to achieve because we're doubling our energy over that period, and we're not going to be able to get to net zero. But also what's changing is the batteries are getting so cheaper. Or the nuclear reactors, certainly the new ones are reliable and they're not that expensive. And this is infrastructure after all. I mean, the question you have to ask when you're talking about energy is, for how many minutes a day are you happy to not have power? Because it's going to turn off. Now, you're used to zero. You might say zero, but that's a very expensive grid to support. I guess my point is that here in the last 3 years, the whole balance of energy with the hydro and particularly the batteries and the solar and the wind is changing so fast that all these politicians should have said by now, do you know what? Everything's changed. We're going to change our mind. Yes, you make a decision. It's one of the elements of resilience. You must make a decision. But the critical process at the end of making a decision is an evaluation. Did it go well? Am I surprised? Has it not gone well? And if you find that you're surprised or it hasn't gone well, go back into that decision and rethink it. My point is that in the energy balance for Australia, that balance has been changing so dynamically, so fast. What we're seeing is an intransience of the government to even acknowledge that maybe nuclear should be part of it now, looking at failures around the world. And they should say, look, we're actually still in a discovery stage and we might even change our mind again. So changing your mind is saying I made a wrong decision and changing it is much better than sticking with a bad decision. Let me be clear. if you're in a crisis, a decision now of 80% accuracy is much better than a perfect decision tomorrow. And that's what the military, that's what pilots do. We make decisions. There is nothing more frustrating in life than a person who can't make a decision, right? But if you make a decision and the data's changed, then you must say, new sets of facts, we're going to change our mind. And people will understand that and accept it. And you're actually giving a reason. When you don't give reasons for things, it's not transparent, it's not verifiable, people don't trust you. That's why governments aren't trusted. They're not transparent, they're not verifiable, and they don't give reasons. So changing a decision is a sign of strength.
Yeah, I love
and
that.
Intelligence.
I've got to say, I'm not very well politically researched or very politically aware outside of the main and major things. But God, I've never seen a politician jump on the telly and say, hey, we made this decision because we believed it was the right thing to do, but we got it wrong. We've got new information and we're going to change that.
Well, I
There's
follow
so
the
little
energy market.
accountability.
I follow AMO, I follow Ausgrid, I follow, I'm following Amber, I'm following all these different parts of the energy grid system and the small reactors. And I have to say, it changes daily. It doesn't stop us saying, well, let's commit to putting in some nuclear so it's ready in 20 years. The best time to plant a tree is yesterday, right? And it's infrastructure after all. But to blindly keep to a decision because you're afraid of changing it is it's not just frustrating, it's wrong, and it will lead you down to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah, I love that. So let's talk about the Air Force. You go into the Air Force. I feel like I wish I had Highway to the Danger Zone somewhere in the background here to play, because this feels like a very Top Gun moment. But you go into the Air Force, you're surrounded by the excitement of all of that, and you obviously fall deeper in love with aviation, this thing that has been such a huge cornerstone of your life. Talk to me about those years. Was it riveting? Was it exciting? Was it all you expected it to be?
Air Force I did a 4-year science degree and then a bit of an engineering diploma. And then I did pilot's course, and I started flying in the squadrons in transport and helicopters. I was posted to F-111 and I had to do fighter operations in Williamtown for about 2 years. So I was in the Air Force. I was a jack of all trades, master of none. I moved 13 times in 11 years, and each of these different places. I spent 9 of my 11 years in training, right? And it was hard work. And there is a lesson for, I think, the listeners, that particularly today, you must commit to a lifetime of learning. You'll never stop learning. I'm still learning, right? So, and I did 9 of my 11 years were learning, and they were exciting times, and the aircraft are fast, high risk. You make an error and it might just kill you. And lots of my friends died. I lost so many friends.
In training?
No, just from operations in the Air Force.
Yeah.
I lost so many. The roommate, the wings came off and hit him on the head, so he couldn't eject. He was killed by the wing coming over and hitting him on the head. But look, so many friends died, and that was that depressed me a little bit. But I love the academics. I love the physical side of flying. Dogfighting is high G, turning your head 180 degrees to find the enemy behind you. That is really hard physical work, and you've got to be at the top of your mental skills at the same time. So mentally, physically, just in every area, the Air Force was exciting, and I absolutely loved it. And about every 2 years, I'd get bored with what I was doing, saying, I want to change, I want to go somewhere else. And the Air Force said, sure, okay, this is where we'll send you. So my life in the Air Force was exciting, active, always changing, and I loved it.
Really good mate of mine that I grew up with and went to school with, who from about the age of 15 set his sights on being a pilot. I remember we're at school, his name's Toby, and he wanted to be a pilot, and he started taking flying lessons from as soon as he could, and he'd save up the money, he worked really hard, his parents helped him a little bit, get in a plane and learn the skills, and then he went to the army followed in his father's footsteps, but he went into the army and he's now flying the fighter helicopters and spent a bunch of time over in the US training on operations, and he's usually back home in Queensland, where his base is. And one thing I love about my mate Toby is he's the kind of guy that really set his sights on mastering something and has committed, at least this period of the last decade of his life to it, and it's been very fruitful for him. I wonder, for you to join Qantas in 1986, what changed your focus from the Air Force to the commercial aviation industry?
Well, actually, I had a job for a year where I was the aide to the Governor General in Canberra. So I lived at Government House with Sir McCow and Nenny and Stephen, a great privilege. And I saw both the service chiefs coming to Government House, and I saw the ministers for aviation there. And both of the top parts of that group didn't impress me. I thought a lot of the chiefs were sycophants. Just when you get to the top of your profession, you should be pushing to make improvements in your service. And the skills of the ministers didn't impress me. So then I realised I had to get out of the Air Force. I thought,
Excuse my ignorance, what do you mean by sycophants? What's that mean?
a sycophant means a yes man.
Okay.
Yes man. They know what they have to do, but they just blindly follow an ignorant leader. And that's what's happening in America at the moment, sycophants. So I said, I have to get out. I knew I had to get out because I couldn't take the risk of, if I stayed in and I got to the top, that I'd have to answer to those ministers, that type of personality. So I had to join Qantas, and I started another business on the side, because you must always have a backup plan, particularly if you're in a career where your career depends on being healthy, fit mentally, which is certainly flying. We do 7 checks a year. But if I didn't pass those checks, I had to have a backup. So I started a computer business when I joined Qantas. I thought there was a 50% chance I'd be sacked from Qantas. So as a backup, I started the computer company. It's still going today, and it's still successful. What it did, and this, very few people did this, when you have security, a backup plan, then 2 things. It means I never actually knew even what day of the week or month I was paid. I don't know if I was paid weekly, monthly, or whatever. I didn't care because I had financial security from this other company. Also, if someone was telling me something that I didn't agree with, I would say, here are my values. I don't agree with you. And if it comes to the crunch, I will leave. I'm not going to compromise my values. You do not own me. You can't tell me what my values are, and I will be honest to my values. Now people find that very challenging when when a junior person tells a senior officer, no, you're wrong, very challenging. But I could do that because I had this safety net. And I would think a lot of people in aviation in their careers feel very scared that if they leave, they've got nothing else in backup. And so they become almost, to the worst case, a prisoner in that group. And so now they think, I don't like the leadership, but I have no choice. That's why, if you want to be resilient, always have a backup plan, right? That's one of the elements of resilience. So having this backup plan meant that I always kept to my values through my career. Many times I disagreed with leadership. I would think a lot of the leadership didn't really appreciate me, but I think they always trusted me in an aircraft, but I had very clear values. And my values, just to be clear, in an aircraft, I'm responsible for the safety of the passengers, the crew, the freight, and the aircraft. I'm accountable to the airline. So I have absolute authority that no one, the chairman of Qantas, the CEO of Qantas, cannot tell me what to do in an aircraft if I think I've got to do something else for safety. I will tell them, no, go away. I'll handcuff them, take them off the flight deck. I will make sure that aircraft gets on the ground. When I'm on the ground and the passengers get off and they're safe, then the leadership in the airline's happy to come up. They're fully welcome to come up and sack me. That's fine. That's the cost of being a leader, that maybe you will get sacked. But my point is, understanding whom I was responsible to, the passengers, I'm accountable to Qantas, And we were talking about company directors, right? Responsible to the company, and then the share,
Mm.
responsible to the company, accountable to shareholders. That'll determine how much authority you take. Because if you can't work out those first two items, you will never know how much authority you're going to take, and you will be troubled with your decision making for your life. So in my career, I've never been troubled about what authority I will assume in the company.
So let me ask you this. You're a very rational, logical thinker. You've spoken about facts, understanding, probably for you, the probability of, potential issues coming up as a pilot. And when I say potential issues with the aircraft. I know that not every flight goes to plan, and machines break down. They have problems, they have difficulties. How aware were you when you stepped into your role? I'm sure at the Air Force you experienced it many times, unfortunately with the loss of friends, but when you stepped into the commercial aviation space, how aware were you that over the course of a long career, you were going to encounter some problems?
Oh, all the time. You encounter problems all the time. I would say 5% of the time you're solving crises. There's so many inputs into having a commercial flight take off, from the servicing of the aircraft, the spare parts, the food, the sewerage, the cabin crew, the pilots, the airways clearances, flight plans. I mean, it's loading schedules. Is that you have to trust that these things come together, and they do in a most extraordinary system. You trust that they come together, and then you launch. Now, I didn't load the fuel personally. I didn't blend the fuel. So there is a trust. But with that, pilots are trained to be resilient so that when things go wrong, we can work out how to resolve the problem and get back down on the ground safely. So yes, when a pilot advances the thrust levers to take off, he's trusting hundreds of systems, and he has no idea what's going to happen. No, just like this last incident with the A320 nosing over that's caused the worldwide grounding, those pilots didn't know that were going to happen, but they have defenses they use when the computers misbehave. This is where resilience comes in, that if you understand understand all the systems down to their core, and if they're working, then use them as a tool. If the automation doesn't work as a tool, turn it off, go manual, and you'll be safe. So you must, as a pilot, be trained to fly manually, whether the aircraft's stalled, inverted, spinning, or on fire. You have to train these hard things. So when things go wrong, you're confident to turn off all those computers, saying, I don't need them, and fly manually. So the attitude, a pilot has a thing called chronic unease. If you're a helicopter pilot, if you ever get on a helicopter, you'll notice there are windows down on the floor just forward of the feet. That's because the pilot can look down there and when he's landing, but generally in flight, they will always be looking down there because that's where the helicopter thinks they're going to go. Helicopter pilots are expecting that machine to fail every time, all the time, and they're always ready. They're doing the what ifs. We have a thing called we train for the worst and hope for the best. We have a chronic unease for the status quo. Yes, everything's comfortable now, but what happens if this engine fails? A pilot who ever says that he's bored in flight is not doing his job. He's not thinking of the what ifs, because they can happen when you least expect it. So yes, pilots have a chronic unease. We're expecting terrible things to happen. And we also have this confidence, if we're resilient, that we can handle the aircraft no matter what happens.
So this is a very interesting topic of conversation. I remember hearing Toto Wolff, the team manager of Mercedes in the F1, talking about how he actually has a negative bias at work because he's constantly scanning for problems in a world of problems so that he can instantly solve them and move forward. I wonder whether, I don't know if you'd label it as negative, maybe you would, but do you think you have a negative bias as a pilot?
Oh, absolutely. Every time we take off, and people won't be aware that during a takeoff until the aircraft gets to about 100 feet, you're going through about 6 different phases of that takeoff. What are you going to do if this happens? And as and pilots are reading out speeds, and you're hearing sounds of aircraft declaring different speed milestones, and as with each speed milestone, your actual thinking has to change. It's like you're changing in the Apollo devices that went to the moon, the program couldn't hold that much memory. So they had to load up new programs, maybe 50 programs for 50 different stages of flight. That's what a pilot does for a takeoff. And at each milestone, you're changing the programming. This is what I'm going to do if I have an engine failure. This is what I have to do if we have a bird strike. So yes, you're assuming the worst and you're ready. When Neil Armstrong was landing on the moon, his heart rate was up to 160 beats per second, per minute. And people said, oh, he was nervous. No, he wasn't nervous. He had been practicing all these different what ifs on the ground before this first descent to the moon. And he knew all these different regimes he was going through. And he's programming and changing his mindset as he passes these different thresholds. And all the time when he changes the mindset, then he says, well, what happens if this? What happens if that? Everything, in fact, there was a lot going wrong, but that's outside the scope of this talk. My point is, Neil Armstrong's heart rate was high because he's going through the what ifs. He's getting ready for every stage. He wasn't scared, but he was highly active. And that's what, and if the heart rate goes up on F1 car drivers or pilots on a takeoff or landing, that's because they're getting more alert, more sequencing their train of thought for what they're going to do. The idea is you never take an aircraft where your mind hasn't been 5 minutes before. And I'd say those F1 drivers have already completed the first lap in their mind before they even start.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I have to ask you, can we talk about that fateful day? QF32, flying out of Singapore to Sydney,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Did that morning itself feel any different in any way?
Well, it was because we had 2 extra pilots, 2 extra captains. The crew would normally be 3, myself as pilot in command, a first officer and a second officer, a crew of 3. But once a year we have what we call a route check, which is where, well, one of the captains that came along, he would just monitor me to see on a normal flight when nothing's being challenged, do I do everything right, look after the passengers, the aircraft, follow the orders, air traffic control. And at the end of the flight, Harry, this captain, would say, yes, Richard, you pass, or you go into retraining. But Harry was learning to become a check captain. So we had David Evans, a very experienced check captain. We had a check captain training a check captain to check me. We had all 3 chiefs and not many Indians. And it's an augmented crew where traditionally things go wrong because everyone else thinks that everyone else is doing the monitoring, where it turns out no one's doing the monitoring. You're assuming. So I had to give a warning to my crew of 2, the first officer and second officer, saying, we've got 2 extra captains. Do not let them distract you. They are here to do a check of me. That's nothing to do with the operation, with the safe operation of the passengers. You must keep your focus on the operation. I will make mistakes, not intentionally. I don't want to, but I will because I'm human. And you must tell me. Don't worry about my license. The aim is to get the passengers safely to the destination. My values, right? So, and if you don't tell me, you can prioritize when to tell me, but if you don't tell me, I will punish you. So I'm telling them, I'm going to make mistakes. I value their input. In fact, they must give it. I'm giving everyone, no matter, even if that second officer has been in the company for 1 day, he's been given the authority to challenge the command. And both of them being told not to be distracted by the other captains because they're not part of the formal crew. So that was an unusual start to the day. And it would turn out prescient because then the engine failed and other stuff happened. But I guess it's important that before, when a team comes together, that you make sure the conditions that the team work is clear, and you ideally want to give everyone the psychological safety to step up and say, hey, Richard, stop, I'm not happy. Doesn't matter if they're wrong, it's much better to be on the ground wishing you're in the air than in the air wishing you're on the ground. So if some pilot says, hey, stop, I will always stop, listen to what they're saying. And whether they're right or wrong, we can sort out later. But safety is imperative. It's values, right? So all this stuff comes off your values. Everyone listening to this must know their values and be true to them.
469 passengers that day. Minutes into your flight out of Singapore, I heard you say to Carl Stefanovic in your 60 Minutes interview many years ago that you train for 1 to 2 system failures at any one time as a pilot. You're always troubleshooting, and part of that troubleshooting is training when 1 or 2 issues occur. That day, 60 issues on that plane. It starts with, I'm sure you'll be able to give me more detail here, a small oil leak in the turbine of engine 2. That oil then ignites and explodes, taking out part of the wing and the controls. Talk to me about the realization that we have a problem.
Well, there was the sound, and we went through the initial process to stabilize the aircraft, which we call aviate, navigate, communicate. And once that was done and the aircraft is safe, because many aircraft crash because they never actually secure the aircraft. They go straight into a checklist, get distracted, and tunnel vision, and they don't fly the airplane, and it crashes.
Can you
So
explain to me what securing the aircraft means?
securing the aircraft, well, first of all, even before, securing the engine means to shut it down, to cut off the fuel, to stop the fire, and cut off maybe the oil lines, the electrical lines, the fuel lines. So that's what we call secure. So it can't keep burning. When I'm talking about securing the aircraft, which is more important than securing the engine, right? Concorde crashed because the engineer shut off an engine on the runway. He secured the engine on the runway rather than keep it running with thrust and looking after the aircraft. When he shut down the engine on the runway, they had 2 engine failures, they're dead. So he shouldn't have done that, right? So you secure the aircraft first, which means you make sure it's above the mountains on a safe trajectory, that it's flying with a good speed. In other words, aerodynamically, it's working properly, it's in a safe area, and it's flying, and everything's stable. Once that's done, and could take 30 seconds to make sure that's all correct, and it did in this day, then you can start to look at what's wrong with the aircraft. Because if you don't protect the aircraft with this, we use this creed, aviate, navigate, communicate, fly the airplane, find a safe place, and then talk to people. We did that, and then I said we are safe. ECAM actions, which is assigned to Matt, the first officer, to go head down and start to checklist procedures. And then Matt starts a checklist, and now we secure the engine, stop the fuel getting into the engine that's on fire, things like that. These are processes that we practice in the simulator. They practice the things where we get loud explosions, so we recognize an engine failure when it happens. We don't get scared. We don't get the fear response, but we recognize, and I did, yes, we've had an engine failure. Now we need to run through the checklist to shut it down. The difference on this day was, even after we secured the engine, there were 40 failures queued up, checklists queued up in the first second. And so not just the extent of the primary failures, but 2 primary failures might combine to make a secondary failures. These were harder to track. And we have a thing called a mental model. A mental model is, that you have an arms and legs. You can close your eyes and touch your nose with the tip of your finger because your mental model knows where your fingertip is. You can drive your car and put the nose wheel within 2 inches of the curb because your mental model has that. We have a mental model of the aeroplane with all these 4 million parts, 22 systems. And the mental model that I had was being challenged with all these failures of the primary and then the secondary things. So that was the major challenge, the number of failures, keeping the mental model, and in fact I lost the mental model at one stage. And it was what we call a black swan event, which is a low probability, very severe event that no one had ever forecast. The black swan event was having all these failures coming up at once that the Airbus aircraft had never been designed to withstand. The certification said it did not have to survive that, but the aircraft did, because the aircraft design and construction was resilient, and the crews with the teams were resilient. So yes, a lot of things went outside the normal, went outside what we're trained in simulators, but that's when resilience counts. And all these different elements of resilience that I've been talking about, which is knowledge, training, experience, teamwork, leadership, decision-making, crisis management, and risk. When you combine all these factors that we call human factors are how people are built, what they can do, how they respond, and how you build systems for them. When you understand the human factors of how humans work in a complex mechanical machine and how to work as a team efficiently, then you can be resilient when those machines fail.
I want to freeze the frame here. Let's pause Rich the pilot, Rich the human, sitting in the cockpit, recognizing that there's a lot going wrong right now. You're troubleshooting. But you as the human being, as the father of Alex and Sophia, the husband of Coral, what part of you, if any part, if there's any space for it in that moment, is thinking about your family back home in Sydney and whether you'll get the opportunity to see them again?
Very good question. Because in my case, I never did. They never surfaced. We were challenged, and at one time I thought I'd lost the plot and I had to do something else as a consequence. We were told we couldn't land, and there was no solution to landing. I thought, and I had to tell the passengers. I told the passengers straight after being told by Dave, there's no landing solution, we can't do it. I told the passengers we'll be down on the ground in 45 minutes. Having been told we can't land. I didn't know how we were going to do it, but I was confident that we could. And I was totally focused on solving all those problems. In fact, I didn't ring my wife, and the engine blew up at midday. I didn't call my wife until midnight that night because my values were protecting the passengers and the crew, and that took so long. And I apologized to my wife, and I feel guilty or ashamed that I didn't bring her in earlier. But I was so focused on trying to protect the passengers and the crew that my family came second. Now, some of the other crew, they've told me early in the flight, and in fact, I think he said it on 60 Minutes. One of the pilots said, I didn't know if I'd see my family again. So yes, very early, within 4 minutes of the engine blowing up, one of the pilots is thinking about his family. Will he see them again? No, I didn't. I never did. I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong in this. I'm just saying I never did.
Talk to me about the responsibility to the passengers, because I can imagine that there is a very challenging conversation that occurs in the mind of staff on that flight that day. Do we tell them how potentially dire this is? But we have to keep the flight calm. We have to keep people in a space in which they don't complicate matters so that we can solve this problem. What does that protocol, procedure, conversation look like when deciding whether to keep everyone really calm? Hey, we're going to get to the ground, 45 minutes. Or are we going to potentially give these people an opportunity to message their loved ones?
Oh, I see. Everyone had been told to turn their phones off, and they did because we're in a safety mode. We weren't in a comfort mode. So the passengers really didn't use their phones at all. In a crisis, about 60% of the time you're anticipating the crisis because 80% of the time you caused it. Let's go back to the Boeing and the Maxes. The Boeing knew the Max had those issues. They never decided to take control of that crisis early on and stop it. So, and these days also, in a crisis, everyone with a mobile phone is a journalist. They're taking photographs, they're feeding it up to YouTube, right? In the A380, we had an in-flight entertainment screen showing the hole in the wing and the fuel coming out. In that crisis, everyone is seeing what's happening. Everyone's a witness. Everyone's probably got, maybe they had their phones going and recording it. So there's no secrecy. There used to be a thing called the golden hour, that in a crisis, the leadership could amass all the information, get the media into a room, and then drip feed the information they wanted to drip feed to them. That's all gone with social media, with all the phones, right? So if you want to have trust, you have to have transparency, with people having the ability to validate, trust but verify. And ultimately, if you want people to trust you, you've got to give reasons for your actions. So acknowledge a situation because everyone can see that they're in it. And then you give reasons for what you're doing. And people say, well, that makes sense. So at the end, after the flight, when the passengers are in the terminal, I gave them each section, there were 3 sections where people were amassed, and they each got a 45-minute lecture on what had happened, why, what was about to happen to them, what they needed to do. And I told the passengers the media are going to be outside, they're going to be all negative, but I'm giving you the facts on how often engines fail. I'm telling you about the Airbus. I gave them lots of facts. I'm giving them reasons why we didn't get them off the aircraft early. Because we had them on the aircraft for 2 hours after we landed. I'm giving them reasons the whole time for why we did things. And then I realized one of the vectors for fear is that there's no single point of contact. There's no one takes responsibility. If there's a crisis, good luck finding a phone number for the parent company on its website, because companies don't publish their phone numbers anymore. So the passengers are about to leave these lounges to go back around the world with no one to contact. So I knew that I had to do something. So I said that you pay extra to fly in this airline, and we have done a bad job, but I promise I'll make it up to you. So if you think that the airline isn't doing what you want it to do, or if you think that we don't care about you. Now, these are two measurements that are in the receiver's mind. If you don't think we're doing what you want to do, or if you don't think we're caring, then here's my mobile phone number, call me. So I gave everyone on that flight got my mobile number. It's a single point of contact. I'm taking responsibility, and I'm now going to hear everyone's problems. I think it put the corporate Qantas into meltdown, because now they knew that I was a auditor for every passenger going home around the world. The Qantas system worked perfectly. They looked after everyone. There were no complaints. I didn't get a single call with a complaint, a single call to say help. I can't stress how extraordinary Qantas was in getting all those passengers home well. But 20 people called up to say, can we have a drink? So even giving my mobile phone number to every one of those passengers in a crisis only had a positive outlook. When you show humility and vulnerability in a crisis, then you create trust and teamwork. And those passengers, when they left the terminal, I'm not aware of a single photograph anywhere in the world of a passenger on QF32 crying when they went home, right? Anywhere in the world. They were all happy. They all had the vectors for fear satisfied, so that they weren't afraid. They knew that if they had a problem, they could call me, and they protected Qantas and the media. And so the media that says that was just looking upon this gleefully. Qantas had such bad media going up to QF32. This could have been the last nail in the coffin, because everything Qantas was doing was wrong, and the media was going for the kill. And they couldn't get one passenger to say a negative thing about Qantas. And the whole media worldwide realised there's only one story left, which is to tell the nice story. So it became a good story. Not one passenger complained to the media.
It's fascinating,
And
isn't it?
Qantas came out with a brand stronger after QF32 than it had when it went in. This is another measurement of resilience, isn't it? This is corporate resilience. So this is many teams. There's 8 teams, including the ground staff and the Qantas Crisis Centre and all the support people, making sure all those passengers got home safe. So they didn't just satisfy my value that I would get them home for dinner. The Qantas system satisfied them really forever, that they were all treated with compassion, empathy, and care.
I love that. Did you take any of those 20 up on a drink?
Absolutely. Oh, they're lifetime friends. I get Christmas cards every year from many people. There's one friend in Vancouver that has subscribed me to National Geographic every year, ever since. I get text,
Really? That's cool, isn't it?
I get text emails from a person up in Scotland who takes a photo of his family saying, thank you to all of the crew, because here's my family that I would have never known otherwise.
Mate, I love that. How good is that?
So if there's a lesson for people listening to this, when you are in a crisis, be transparent, give them reasons, and give them the full and open disclosure of what's happened. Give them a guarantee with your phone number, and people will respect you, and they actually will become the passengers of QF32 became the 8th team that protected the airline. Without those passengers, the Qantas brand would have gone into the sink.
Yeah, I love that. Mate, that's what a wonderful story. Let me ask you my last question on this. Actually, I've got two last questions on this. You glide the plane back into Singapore at 360 kilometers per hour. How difficult is that actually to do without the systems that you would typically rely on to land?
Well, every time you start a descent in an aeroplane, going Melbourne to Sydney, anywhere in the world, the last 300 kilometres is a glide. The engines are brought back to idle. Just imagine
Okay.
idling in your car and you're slowly rolling up to the traffic light. Well, we're going down a hill, and the last 300 kilometres is all downhill with the engines at idle. We're gliding. And so if we lost all the engines, there really wouldn't be much difference to what you experience on every flight, right?
Interesting.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is there were lots of problems with the aircraft aerodynamically and from an engineering perspective. So it complicated the approach, and we were getting different warnings coming up during the approach and alarms. But the aircraft, again, if you understand the systems and how the computers are sensing data and how you might set up the aircraft well to either predict the problem in advance, because that's what we did. We did a test of the landing before we did it at a safe altitude. It's called control check. We proved the airplane to safe to land at 4,000 feet before we started the approach, because we couldn't afford to start an approach and then discover halfway down that the flight controls weren't working properly and we'd crash, because that's happened in the past. So there were a lot of challenges, but the aircraft came in and it handled it really well. And I made a presentation to 600 leaders of Airbus at their annual leadership conference. And at the end of the talk, I explained that for every person that dies, there'll be 70 people that will go to the church to say farewell. And so I said, so a whole lot of people, which was 469 passengers times 69, I said 32,000 people would like to say thank you to Airbus for building a resilient aircraft, because that's really what they did. The 380 is, I think, the best aircraft in the sky, survived the Black Swan event, and Airbus saved 32,000 family and secondary victims from post-traumatic stress.
I don't know what I'm leaning into here, but there was something that I found pretty cool when I watched the footage of that flight, sitting on the tarmac and passengers disembarking. The Qantas mantra, Spirit of Australia, on the side of that plane, passengers stepping off to go back out into the world and find their way home, and the crew. And I thought, oh, there's something about that Spirit of Australia that I felt was very present in the way that you handled this and your story. This resilience, this vision, this focus, that I think it's a nice way to wrap the story. It's a nice bow. What's already incredibly
Qantas
packaged.
was formed in 1920 by 3 investors, and for the 105 years it's been going, everyone, including me, everyone are just caretakers of the brand. Qantas has got the most remarkable safety record. It's never killed anyone in a jet aircraft. Bearing in mind, a lot of piston aircraft crash. We were participating in the Second World War, and we had flights across the Indian Ocean that were in darkness with double sunrises to protect Australia during a war period. Qantas aircraft were put under great risk, and we lost some in war. But in the jet age, we've never lost any. And every pilot is terrified of damaging that brand and that history. And so every person is working their hardest to make sure that nothing happens on their shift. So that's the Spirit of Australia from the pilot's perspective. And I think from the Spirit of Australia, from the public's perspective, everyone at some stage in their life has loved Qantas. It evacuated people from Darwin after Cyclone Tracy. It takes part in rescuing people from around the world. Qantas is actually part of Australia's culture. Everyone has loved it. I think we've had periods where we've had some bad leadership, where people have, that trust has been damaged. I think the leadership team we've got now, particularly with John Mullen as the chair, is the best we've probably had that I can remember. So I think people will come back to loving the brand again. And so the pilots aren't changing at all. We're always trying to make sure nothing happens on our shift. and we have this chronic unease at a will. So we are forever learning and working hard as we can. But for the passengers, I think to walk on an aircraft when you're overseas after being away for a couple of years, and you hear, "G'day, mate."
It's a good feeling.
You know
isn't it?
you're home,
Yeah.
and that is a spirit of Australia, and that is priceless.
I love that. I want to ask you, off-brand, but the Malaysian Airlines flight, MH370, that went missing years ago. Do you have any theories as a pilot, someone who's existed in the world of aviation and understands it?
Oh, I think there's 100 possibilities. It was taken by the Russians. It was taken by the Chinese. They crashed it on an island somewhere. Look, there's conspiracy theories for everything, and people just love creating things out of nothing. Again, I'm driven by facts, right? So it's very powerful to say you don't know, and I say I don't know many times. So a person came up to me after I gave a presentation and they said, "What happened to MH370?" And I said, "I don't know." She said, "Well, you must have an idea." And I said, "Well, it could be hijack, it could be anything." Just imagine being the family of that captain, and people are saying that he purposely took that aircraft away. What if that's not true? There's no evidence that he did. What if that's not true? How terrible for that family that they're being convicted without evidence that that husband took the aircraft. So I said, "No, I don't know." And she said, "Well, you must have an idea." And I said, "No, there are too many conspiracy theories, and one data point will destroy a complicated path you go down. It's a sign of strength to say that you don't know." She said, "No, it's not." And I said, "Well, then you must be religious." Pilots are driven by facts. I don't know where MH370 is. I'm confident we'll find it. And I don't mind saying we don't know. And everyone should be confident saying we don't know, but we will find out.
Yeah.
Some problems are absolutely unsolvable.
We hate uncertainty once again, right?
We have to accept uncertainty.
Yeah.
We have to accept that some problems are unsolvable. And if you don't, it'd be a very stressful life. That's why I've taken you down that path with that last discussion, because it is a sign of strength to say you don't know.
Yeah, I love that. The last thing I want to talk to you about is maybe my favorite movie, at least in my top 5, is Catch Me If You Can, Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. Have you ever seen it?
Yes.
Frank Abagnale Jr., a famous part of his story for those watching, listening who don't know the movie, is this guy, rightfully or wrongfully, however you want to look at it, went down the path of identity theft and fraud. But ultimately part of his story is he faked his pilot's license to do what they call deadheading, which is, getting on as a pilot who's not in operation but being transported to their next destination. So he basically flew around the world for a while for free. How difficult would that be to do?
Probably, based on what's happening around the world today, probably not difficult at all, because the word is social engineering now, and we're using people who are breaking into companies. What they're doing is they're contacting humans inside the company and convincing those humans to give up information to log on computers and break in. So the hack into Qantas was a social engineering thing where someone gave up a password. And now we've got AI that will maybe look at your email trail, determine who you're contacting by email, the type of conversation you're having, and then the AI will replicate your history of conversation and the method that you do it, contact that person in a company and say, "Hi, it's Brad again. Hey, look, I just want this bit of information." But they'll do it in a way that the other person honestly believes it's you and is succeeding, and AI is going to make it even more risky. We're more of a threat than ever to the social engineering and the threat of being hacked from inside the company through the social side rather than brute force cracking a password. So look, the way that Frank got onto the aircraft, that with boarding passes, that to some degree that's been stopped, but the ingenuity of or the creativity of AI to create other ways will not stop, and so the risk will not go away, and in fact the risk is greater than ever before. We have to be really careful with all our communications.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and I don't mean to make light of it, but God, it's a good movie.
It's a great movie. And even in the military, I remember when I was at course, we had to go and attack a different group, and we're going to attack them the next day. Well, what happened was we attacked them the night before. We just followed. They were doing a march around the bush to try and just see if anyone's out there. We trailed them into the campsite. We trailed right behind them, 10 feet behind, into the campsite, and took all their weapons off them out of their tents.
Is this training exercise?
This was a training exercise when I was in the academy. The aim is to be unpredictable, and if you're unpredictable, then you can have great things. You know, if you're unpredictable in the military, in a dogfight, you could win. If you're unpredictable in a game of tennis, you will frustrate the other side. So unpredictability is a key element of warfare.
One of my favourite books is The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, written by Damien Lewis. And Guy Ritchie turned it into a movie many years later with the same title. Henry Cavill, Alan Richardson, a bunch of really great actors in this movie. And one of the key figures of this story is Anders Larsen, a Danish soldier who joined the British Special Forces. Essentially, they were the first Special Forces unit designed to go and try to, I guess, disrupt Hitler's war efforts. And a huge part of their effort in disrupting that was blowing up a lot of their warplanes, the German warplanes that were, really a great success for Germany during the war and proving quite difficult to overcome. And it was this idea of unpredictability, this rogue, smallish group of men who had just so much courage and just the absolute ability to tackle fear and tackle uncertainty on a daily basis. That was imperative to the war effort. It was actually a unit designed by Winston Churchill that he had to go against the grain of leadership and authority at the time in quite a bit of secrecy to keep this unit together. It's a fascinating story. I feel like you'd really enjoy it based off the conversation we just had.
Well, I've talked about Elon Musk coming from the ground up, from failure through to success, whereas NASA they had 5% of the GDP to use during the Apollo phase.
Interesting.
Had limited money, but they had to make sure everything worked first go. And bearing in mind, no one's ever repeated what Apollo did in the 60s and 70s. No one has ever been able to repeat it, even with all the improvements in tech, right? How amazing is that? But what I'm saying is this concept of reversing the logic. When you think that you have exhausted the options, and we did this on QF32, reverse the logic. Think of what would I never do? What would be the last thing I'd ever do? And so you think of these ridiculous things that, of course, you'd never do it, but then you realize, oh no, hold on, that's actually possible. So Elon Musk is reversing the logic. We reverse the logic on QF32. And I think everyone, if they're struggling with a problem that has no solution, absolutely invert the logic. And it's probably going to be unpredicted because it is so crazy, but it actually often has a very high success rate.
Rich, I've enjoyed this so much. I feel like we could sit here for hours, but I'm mindful of the time. You've got a busy day ahead of you. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. For me, this is fascinating because I've never had a conversation with someone who has walked the path that you have in life. But I love that in and amongst this incredible story that the world became familiar with, the pilot who, amongst his incredible team and an incredible group of passengers, landed QF32 safely. You are this human being who has just a surprise package of ideas and interests that has made this a really fun conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Brad. It's been great to talk with you.
My pleasure. Cheers, mate. That's great. So we're sitting here just in the immediacy of the post-podcast, and Rich has got two of his books here. He's got QF32, which is about the flight that we've spoken about in much detail today, but also this book, Fly, which is about these 8 elements of resilience, in which many we've touched on today. And I think that if you want to hear about resilience from Rich's unique perspective, if you love this episode today, go check this out. I'm sure they can get it on Amazon, right? Or anywhere.
At any bookshop, it's available. Or they can go to flythebook.com.
Amazing. Get in and amongst it.
Or qf32.com, and it will lead the same way.
I love your work, Rich. Thank you.
Thank you.